Several months ago, while I was working graveyard security at an apartment complex, something happened that still unsettles me to this day. Not long before this incident, someone had broken into one of the vacant units on the property. The front door had been forced open hard enough to damage the frame, and it looked like whoever did it may have stayed there overnight. After that, management instructed security to begin nightly vacant unit checks on certain empty apartments to make sure nobody else had broken in or was secretly staying inside. Part of my nightly routine became unlocking these vacant units, clearing every room, closet, and bathroom, then taking photos afterward to document that the inspection had been completed. One night during my shift, I walked up to one particular vacant ground floor unit very late at night. The property was quiet and completely still. I inserted the key management had labeled for the apartment, but the lock wouldn't turn correctly. At first, I thought I had the wrong key. I stood outside the door trying different ones, getting frustrated while fumbling with the lock in the dark. Finally, I tried the original key again. Right as the lock was about to turn, I heard rapid knocking from the other side of the door. Not from somewhere in the building, directly on the other side of the apartment door. I felt stuck there for a few seconds, just staring at it. The sound was fast and deliberate, like whoever was inside had been listening to me struggle with the lock and chose that exact moment to react. I remember looking toward the peephole and getting this overwhelming feeling that someone was standing there looking directly back at me. I backed away from the door and radioed for backup, telling my supervisor I believed somebody might be inside the vacant unit. While waiting outside, I kept replaying the situation in my head. I even started wondering if the reason the key wouldn't turn earlier was because somebody inside had been holding the lock mechanism from the other side. Around 10 minutes later, backup arrived. One of the responding officers was a supervisor I'll call Officer Fields. Another patrol officer arrived with him. I explained what happened and why I thought someone was inside. At the time, the only thing I carried for protection was pepper spray, and I wasn't about to enter a potentially occupied apartment alone in the middle of the night. The three of us approached the unit again, unlocked the door, announced ourselves, and entered. Both officers had tasers and firearms drawn while we cleared the apartment room by room. Nobody was there. We checked the bedrooms, bathrooms, closets, kitchen, and patio area. There were no signs of forced entry, no movement, and no indication that anyone had recently been there. What bothered me most was that every possible exit was still locked from the inside, including the sliding glass door and the windows. I remember feeling relieved and embarrassed at the same time. I explained again exactly what I'd heard, and to their credit, they reassured me that calling for backup had been the right decision. If somebody really had been inside, entering alone could have gone badly. Eventually, the officers left, and before driving away, Officer Fields reminded me to finish taking photos for the vacant unit report. So I went back inside alone. I finished taking pictures throughout the apartment and completed the check without hearing or seeing anything else unusual. At that point, I thought the situation was over. The next day at home, I told my wife about what had happened. She asked to see the photos from the apartment, so I pulled up the report on my phone and handed it to her. While scrolling through the images, she suddenly stopped at one of the photos and said, "Wait, what is that?" It was a picture I had taken of one of the bedroom closets. At first I didn't see anything. The closet just looked unusually dark, especially because I clearly remembered my camera flash going off when I took the picture. But after adjusting the brightness and exposure later, I realized there was something in the closet that I hadn't seen before. The realization hit me immediately. When I took that picture, I had been standing only a few feet away from whatever appeared in that image. What disturbed me even more was that I clearly remembered the flash lighting up the closet when I took the picture, but the image itself came out far darker than it should have. That night before work, I started showing the image to family members because I genuinely didn't know what to make of it. I also sent the enhanced version to my boss. Word about the incident spread quickly among other officers and supervisors. When I arrived back at work the next night, I showed the image to apartment management. They were disturbed enough by it that they told me I no longer needed to perform vacant unit checks on that apartment. But another supervisor, who I'll call Officer Brooks, had already heard about the incident and wanted to see the apartment for himself. Later that night, he asked me to accompany him back to the unit. Even though management had already excused us from checking it anymore, we returned together and searched the apartment again room by room. At first everything seemed normal, but when we reached the same bedroom where I had taken the closet photo, Officer Brooks suddenly stopped and listened for a second. Then he told me something about the room felt off. I told him that this was the exact room where I had unknowingly captured the figure in the photograph the night before. For some added context, my uncle had asked me to send him any future photos taken inside the apartment so he could look through them himself afterward. So both me and Officer Brooks took pictures throughout the unit while we searched it. Eventually we finished the check, locked the apartment back up, and left. While walking away, Officer Brooks started telling me about paranormal experiences he'd had earlier in his life, which honestly made the whole situation feel even worse. Later that night, I asked him to send me every photo he had taken inside the apartment. At first glance, I didn't notice anything unusual. Then I forwarded the images to my uncle. Sometime later, he contacted me and asked, "Do you see anything in this one?" He sent back one of the photos Officer Brooks had taken inside the same bedroom where the closet was. At first I didn't understand what he was seeing. Then he enhanced the image, and there it was again. Another face. What unsettled me most was realizing that Officer Brooks had taken that photo around the same moment he told me the room felt strange. And just like me, whatever appeared in the image would have been standing only a few feet away from him. I sent the enhanced image back to Officer Brooks. At first he thought I was messing with him until he adjusted the image himself on his own phone and saw the same thing. After that second night, I never entered the apartment again. Management had already removed the unit from our nightly vacant checks, and after a while, I stopped bringing the incident up around work altogether. I could already tell people were beginning to think the whole story sounded unbelievable. I understand why people would doubt it, but it was 2 separate nights, 2 different phones, and 2 different people capturing something terrifying and unusual in the same bedroom. I probably wouldn't have believed it either if I hadn't experienced it myself, and then seen what my supervisor captured there on a completely different night. But I know what I heard outside that apartment door, and I know those images disturbed everybody who saw them. Not long after that, the property's maintenance man ended up moving into that same apartment with his family. From what I had heard, tenants never seemed to stay in that unit very long, or at the very least, they usually didn't renew their lease. After everything that happened, that suddenly started to feel a lot more unsettling to me. I started wondering if maybe some of those residents had frightening experiences too. I remember feeling bad for the maintenance man after he moved in, especially knowing he had his family there. Part of me wanted to tell him everything that had happened inside that unit. But what do you even say to somebody? There's no normal way to have that conversation, so I never said anything. And to this day, I still wonder whether management ever told him what happened in that apartment before he moved his family in. When my younger brother was 6 years old, my family moved into an older rental house outside a small town in Pennsylvania. The place wasn't huge, but it had a big basement that always felt colder than the rest of the house, no matter what season it was. My parents used it mostly for storage, and me and my brother avoided going down there unless we absolutely had to. The main hallway had this old heater vent low against the wall right outside my brother's room. Every time the heat kicked on, it would make this hollow, rattling sound through the ductwork. About a month after we moved in, things took a weird turn. I started hearing my brother out there in the middle of the night, talking like he was having a full conversation with someone. But whenever I looked, absolutely no one was there. He would just be standing or sitting right there in the hallway, completely alone, looking down toward the heater vent. At first, nobody thought much of it. He was 6. Kids talk to toys and imaginary friends all the time, but he started doing it almost every night. My room was directly across from his, and I remember waking up around midnight hearing him whispering near the floor. One night, I opened my door and saw him kneeling beside the vent, with his face inches away from it like he was listening to someone on the other side. I asked him what he was doing. He looked back at me completely calm and said, "I'm talking to the lady downstairs." I remember getting annoyed more than scared. I told him to stop messing around and go back to bed. Then he said something that still bothers me years later. She says she can hear us through the walls. After that, things started happening more often. Sometimes late at night, when the house was completely quiet, I'd hear what sounded like muffled talking coming through the vent in the hallway. Not clear words, just the sound of a conversation somewhere far away underneath us. My dad thought the ductwork was carrying noise from neighboring houses, but the nearest house was over 100 feet away. One night, my mom heard it too. She woke my dad up around 2 a.m. because she thought someone had left a TV on in the basement. They both went downstairs to check and found the room completely dark and silent. But while they were standing at the bottom of the basement stairs, they both heard what sounded like movement somewhere deeper in the basement storage room. My dad searched the area with a flashlight and found nothing. After that night, my parents wouldn't let my brother sleep alone anymore and moved him into a room with me. Even though the rest of us were getting freaked out, my brother never seemed scared at all. He remained completely casual about it, calmly telling my mom that the lady in the vent wanted him to help her. A few days later, I experienced the only thing I still can't explain. I woke up in the middle of the night needing water. As I walked into the hallway, I heard whispering coming from the heater vent outside my brother's room. It sounded like a woman's voice. I couldn't make out most of it, but I heard one sentence clearly enough to stop me cold. "Come downstairs." I stood there frozen for probably 10 seconds listening. Then the whispering stopped completely. At that exact moment, I heard what sounded like heavy footsteps from the basement directly beneath me. The next morning, my parents started looking for another place to live. We moved out less than 3 weeks later. Years afterward, my mom admitted there was one thing she never told us at the time because she didn't want to scare us. The final night before we moved, she woke up around 3 a.m. and found my brother standing in the hallway beside the vent. She asked him what he was doing, and according to her, he looked down at the vent and quietly said, "She says she's lonely now." I grew up in the Bay Area, and if you're from there, you've probably heard of Empire Mine Road in Antioch. It is said to be one of the most haunted roads in California. It's just a really dark, isolated stretch of road that has had a lot of unsettling stories and locations tied to it for decades. One night, when we were older teenagers, a big group of our friends decided to get together. We wanted to hit all the legendary scary spots along that road in one single night, just to see for ourselves what all the talk was about. Because there were so many of us, we had to split up into a few different cars. My friend Steve was driving the car I was in, and packed inside with us were Erica, Christy, Lisa, and maybe Ryan. I know there were a few other people in the other vehicles, but looking back now, I honestly can't remember exactly who else was there. Our plan was to check out the old abandoned slaughterhouse, Gravity Hill, the gates of hell, and then take a drive out to a separate spot people called Murder Hill. We started driving late at night, probably past midnight, leaving the main city behind. As soon as you turn onto Empire Mine Road, the atmosphere changes. It's incredibly narrow, completely unlit, and surrounded by these massive, pitch-black hillsides. Our first stop was the old slaughterhouse property. Local stories said it was a hotspot for cult activity and devil worshippers. People who had snuck in during the day claimed to find remnants of rituals, like melted black candles and symbols spray-painted on the walls. The property itself consisted of a massive, empty warehouse and an abandoned residential home. Some have claimed it was haunted by the spirit of an old man who used to be the groundskeeper there. People always said his ghost still stalked the property, and that visitors would sometimes hear the sound of his heavy footsteps or chains clanking inside the empty buildings. We pulled up and cut off the headlights and engines, and then went out into the darkness. It was an empty, heavily graffitied property, and walking onto that land felt incredibly wrong. At first, we went into the abandoned residence. The whole place felt disturbing, but there was some excitement in knowing we shouldn't be there. It was so dark at the time you almost couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. A group of us started walking behind the home to the main building of the slaughterhouse. Since there was nothing else out there, it felt like any slightest sound was amplified. The vibe was intensely negative, and we had this overwhelming heavy feeling that someone else might be out there in the dark watching us. That's when things took a turn. I don't recall if Erica heard something specific shuffling in the dead grass, or if she saw something move in the shadows of the abandoned house, but she suddenly started freaking out. She began crying uncontrollably, completely panicked. A few of us immediately stepped in, trying our best to calm her down, but she was completely terrified and desperately begging us to leave. Seeing her react like that, with pure terror, instantly intensified the uneasiness we all felt. Whatever she saw or heard, and her sheer frantic reaction to it, was enough for the rest of us to get out of there. We didn't wait around to find out what was in the dark. We immediately got back into our cars and left. Once we got some distance from the slaughterhouse, we drove further down the road to check out Gravity Hill. The local story was that a school bus had crashed nearby years ago, and the spirits of the children would push your car uphill to keep you safe from harm. Others believe it may be the spirits of the nearby cemetery. People always talked about finding ghostly handprints on their bumpers afterward. Steve drove to the bottom of the incline, completely stopped the car, and put it in neutral. He took his foot entirely off the pedal. For a second, nothing happened. Then the car started slowly rolling. It looked like we should be drifting backward down the slope, but the car was steadily moving uphill and gaining momentum. We all just looked at each other in disbelief. It's hard to describe the feeling of a vehicle moving uphill on its own without anyone touching the pedals, but it felt completely unnatural. After we left there, we drove up a little further to the gates of hell, the barriers closing off the end of a private side road off of Empire Mine. People say you shouldn't go out there by yourself, or go at all, because of the strange paranormal things that happen there. Many claim the gates lead to where an old insane asylum once was, and locals say the tortured souls of past patients still wander the area. Others have seen what they call the White Witch, or even a white deer that stands on its hind legs. Real crazy stuff. A lot of people have a physical reaction when they go there, feeling immediately ill. I remember that we did not stay there very long. Probably a good thing. We pulled over to meet up with the friends in the other cars to talk about what just happened. That's when things got even creepier. One of the cars had marks that looked like hand and fingerprints smeared clearly into the dust on their trunk and rear bumper. But the night wasn't over yet. We got back onto the main highway and drove quite a ways out to our final destination, Murder Hill. Murder Hill wasn't close to the slaughterhouse. It was a completely separate location situated on the dark, winding stretch of Lake Herman Road between Benicia and Vallejo. That road already had a deeply unsettling history, but teenagers specifically went there for a bizarre visual legend. People from there say that if you stood at the top of the hill lookout late at night, the alignment of the streetlights and the glowing windows of the houses in the valley below perfectly spelled out the word M-U-R-D-E-R. We drove all the way up to the top, parked, and got out of our vehicles to walk over to the edge of the overlook. Everyone was leaning over, staring out into the vast dark grid of city lights below. My friends were pointing into the distance, looking for where it might be. I believe there were some in our group that thought they could actually see it. I strained my eyes, squinting into the night, but to this day, I honestly couldn't make anything out. To me, it just looked like a normal, chaotic maze of streetlights. But standing on that dark hill, listening to my friends point out the word murder in the distance, especially right after the panic at the slaughterhouse, the experience at Gravity Hill, and the fingerprints on the bumper made the entire atmosphere deeply disturbing. Eventually, we got back into our cars and drove back down into the normal, brightly lit parts of town. I don't recall all the minute details of that night. Maybe my mind blocked parts of it out because the overall experience was so unsettling. We never found any real answers about what we experienced, or what Erica saw that made her break down like that. But looking back, it remains one of the creepiest, most unforgettable nights of my youth.